wonderful turnout. Thank you for coming. And my name is Roger Gensch, and I'm the senior pastor here at the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, and we're delighted. Thank you. A few fans. One. And we're delighted to sponsor this event, which is happening in a very timely time. And in fact, I wasn't sure I was going to get here. I was coming in from 395 and understood that there were some protests that were going down Pennsylvania Avenue and they were closing off streets. And so I thought, wow, maybe this won't happen. But then maybe we should invite the protesters to come up here and be part of this event, right? A very timely event. We had no idea how timely. This event has been scheduled for about 6 months or more, maybe. And yet the events that are happening in Ferguson, where Dr. Trulear has just been, really make this an opportune time for us to have a discussion about these things. Paul Dornan is going to come and give you a little bit of a background on the McClendon Scholar in Residence Program, which is sponsoring this event. Let me just tell you a little bit about the build-up to this event. We have, for about 4 years now, been initiating with 4 other churches here in Washington, D.C., and the Washington Interfaith Network, the local affiliate of the Industrial Areas Foundation, Emory United Methodist Church, Mount Lebanon Baptist Church, Lutheran Place Lutheran Church, and New York Avenue Church, an initiative on race and poverty. We started it in a variety of ways together, including concerts, music together. We had a discussion of James Cone's Cross and the Lynching Tree. Last year we discussed Taylor Branch's compend of his 3-volume magnum opus on the civil rights movement and his learnings from that. And this year we're going to take some other initiatives which might include theater, and doing theater around race and poverty. But this is part of that initiative, talking about one of the issues that has come up over and over again has been the issue of mass incarceration and the stuff that Michelle Alexander talks about in the new Jim Crow. So that's a bigger picture of what we have been about, and we hope to get all of your email addresses so that you can be invited to some of these future events, because this is going to be an ongoing affair. So again, thank you for coming, and I will bring Paul Dornan up here in just a second, but we have a lot of guests here. Would love for all of you to find out about the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church. One of the things I would really love for you to know before you leave, and I trust that it is open, is that we have the original draft of the Emancipation Proclamation. And that is in the Lincoln parlor, and so if you're interested, please don't leave without taking a look at it. And we do have some resident historians. The historians, will you raise your hands? There's a few others. Paul Dornan's around here. There's Wilson Golden up there. If you want to find out a little bit about the history of New York Avenue Church, just as an aside. Let us join together in prayer as we begin this event. Oh God, we thank you for this time together tonight, especially at this time in American history, especially at this time after so many deeply hurtful and unjust events have taken place in our life. Racial, not only discrimination, but racial profiling, mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow. Oh God, you have called us as a nation to face into the cross that is American history, to face into the cross that is racism in this country, to face into the cross that is white privilege and domination, to face into the cross that is the woundedness that it has left on all of us, all of us. And God, we invite your healing, liberating presence in our discussion here tonight. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. And I will invite Paul Dornan, if you will, to please come forward and give a little bit about the Scholar in Residence, and then Theo Brown.
Thank you, Roger. and welcome everyone. On behalf of, I'm going to speak in just a minute or so on behalf of the McClendon Scholar in Residence Program. Jack McClendon was associate pastor here at New York Avenue from 1957 to 1991, 35 years. And he was at the forefront of social action in Washington, D.C. I'm going to tell you just a short story. Some of you may have heard of it before. But in 1989, we had done, at New York Avenue, sponsored a conference on the church and serious mental illness. It was conducted up at American U. And we had 200 people from 22 states who were talking about what the role of the church should be responding to mental illness. Among the speakers was Harold Wilkie, who was a UCC minister who had been born without arms. And the first meal that we had, we were sitting in the table next to Dr. Wilkie, Jack and I, and Jack nudged me and said, do you see that? I said, Jack, I see that. That is that Harold Wilkie was eating with his feet. And I thought nothing more of it until Jack nudged me again, and he said, do you see that? And I said, yes, Jack, I see it. A minute later, he said, no, do you see that? And I said, yes, Jack. By the next meal, he was having a meal with Dr. Wilkie. And by the end of the day, he had invited him to preach at New York Avenue. That was illustrative of the way Jack operated. He saw a group, or he saw an injustice, but it wasn't enough that he saw it. We had to see it. And so his constant witness was, I've seen something, you need to see it too. The church needs to see it. One of the major challenges, I think, of the issue of mass incarceration in America is how distant the issue is to the experience of most people, for example, in this congregation. We can keep a safe distance because it impinges on most of us so rarely. In my recollection, for example, there have been only, you might say only, but there have been 3 children of this church in my time here that have been in prison or in jail. There may be more, but I don't know about them. On the other hand, our faith demands that we narrow the social distances between ourselves and others. And to the extent we are truly diverse as a congregation, in our members and in our ministries, we begin to bring those who have direct connection to mass incarceration into our viewpoint, into our purview. Empathy and imagination and grace can work their mysterious ways to break into our comfortable isolation and make us aware of who really is our neighbor. Therefore, we are so pleased to have Professor Trulear here tonight, his presentation, to help us consider how we can help to narrow that distance and respond faithfully to this confounding issue of mass incarceration. Jack would have been so pleased that you were here. So thank you.
I want to add my welcome. I'm Theo Brown, the director of the McClendon Scholar in Residence Program. Delighted to have you with us this evening and see this room completely full, which is what we were hoping would be the case. We're delighted you're here, and we look forward to your participation. And I emphasize participation, because this is not an event at which we anticipate you just sitting there and being passive and listening to what's being said. They'll be part of that, but we are at tables for a reason. We're going to explain that in a moment, where there really is an opportunity for everyone here to talk and share and learn from others in addition to the presentation you're going to hear. So I want to point out just a couple of things about what we're going to do this evening and jump right into our first table discussion, and then we'll have the presentation and other things following. You have a packet in front of you. Don't get lost in it. There is a lot of paper there, but I want to point out a couple of things. On the right-hand side, there is I don't know what color this is, cream? What color is this? Anyway, my wife says I'm colorblind and it's close. But this one that says registration and feedback form. What I would like everyone to invite you to do right now is to fill out the top part of this. Just your name, email, phone, and congregation. If you're with a particular congregation, many of you are from New York Avenue, many of you from other congregations in the city. Fill that out right now. This is the only record we have of your attendance. We didn't stop you at the front with a master list. We want everyone to sign this. And don't worry about the rest of the paper for right now. Just get your registration part done and put that aside. So if you'll do that as we get started. And then we're going to be asking you to leave this at your table when you're finished, and I'll explain the things that are on the bottom later on. On the left side of your packet, on the front there is an agenda which shows you where we're going to go this evening and kind of the flow of the evening. Some of you may have already looked at it. As I said, we're going to be inviting you to participate. There are going to be 3 times during the evening where we're going to pause and have discussions at your table. And those of you who are in the back, who are not at tables, we're going to invite you to just sort of circle your chairs and talk like a table if you want. I just will point out there are a couple of other seats up front here if people do want to join. If you can send latecomers in up to the front, there still are a couple of places. But we will, in a moment, have an opening short conversation. Then we'll have the presentation by Dr. Trulear. Then we'll talk at our tables again and react a little to what we've heard. Then we'll have a fairly extended question and answer period. And then move towards another short closing table discussion where we talk a little bit about, well, what should I do with all this I've heard? What can I do? What are some things that I and my congregation can do to address the issues that we're talking about? So that's the flow of the evening we'll be following. And on the left side of your packet, there's also one other thing I want to point out. There is a pink sheet that is mostly blank. It says notes and reflections. This is for you to do with as you wish, or to do nothing with if you wish. But this is for you to take home. You're not to turn this in or anything. But you may have some things you want to write down at some point during the evening. And we've sort of suggested ideas and insights. Sometimes when I hear a speaker, I think of something I want to write down right then and remember it, or a statistic or a thought. Then questions. As you're going throughout the evening, if you have questions, you want to use this, write down some questions you have. And then at the end, if some thoughts come to you at any point about what you might do or your congregation might do, feel free to make those notes. But this is for you, just to help you take notes and have any sort of record for you. As I said, we'll be asking you to leave the registration response form, and I'll say a little more about that later. One more thing to point out, and then I promise I'll stop. There is a gray sheet of paper that I would like you to take out right now and look at, because we're going to go turn to this and use it right now. What this is a set of suggestions for the table discussions. Obviously, it's your table, and things that come up, you can talk about what is there that comes up at the table. You don't have to follow exactly here. But we have some suggestions of what you do during these discussion periods that we're going to be having. And we ask you to read it over together as we get to each one. Just look right now at introductory discussion. You'll get a sense of what we're going to do to start. Very simply, in just a moment, I'd like you to take, and we'll give about 8 or 10 minutes for it, just a brief amount of time, for you to introduce yourselves at your tables. I know some of you have already been talking and you've met each other. But do go around and let everybody, just to make sure everybody's on board, give your name, where you live, and what congregation you are with. And then after that, I'd ask each of you just to give a very brief answer to the question here that you see on the sheet. What motivated you to be here tonight? Is there something about the topic? Someone told you about it, or you have a new interest? Very briefly. This is not a time for long presentations or talks, but if each of you, just for a few seconds, up to 30 seconds each, would answer that. So give your name, where you live, congregation you're with, and just some of your thoughts about why you're here. There are a lot of things you could be doing on a Wednesday night, including just staying home and relaxing. You are here. Something got you here, something motivated you here. Just briefly what that is. So that's going to be the shape of our first discussion. Ask you to kind of lean in. It's going to be a little noisy in here, and talk with your those at your table. And just someone can kind of help guide you at the table, or you can all sort of help guide your discussion. But I'd ask you to take just about 8 or 10 minutes now, get to know each other, let everybody at the table talk a bit, name, where you live, what congregation you're from, and just a brief bit about what motivates you to be here, and I'll come back in a few minutes after you've been through. So our guest speaker this evening is Dr. Harold Dean Trulear. He is Associate Professor of Applied Theology at the Howard University School of Divinity. Dr. Trulear is also Director of Healing Communities USA, a national project which mobilizes congregations to support those returning from incarceration. Dr. Trulear has lectured extensively across the country, universities, seminaries, churches. He's also the article of several dozen articles, book chapters, essays, and published sermons. He's also co-author of this book, Ministry with Prisoners and Families, The Way Forward, which he co-authored with Charles E. Lewis and Wilson Goode. Some of you may remember Wilson Goode was also mayor of Philadelphia. They are the three authors of this volume, of which one reviewer said the following: if you choose to read one book on the wretched state of the criminal justice system today and its devastating effects on the family and on our communities, especially among the poor, this book is a must-have. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of copies here, but it is available online, and I recommend it to you if you want to follow up in that regard. Dr. Trulear has a BA degree from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Morehouse is in the house. I heard somebody. There we go. All right. And his PhD is from Drew University. In addition to the teaching he does at Howard, he has had teaching positions at Yale University, Colgate Rochester Divinity School, Eastern University, and Hartford Seminary. He is one of the most prominent national leaders in the effort to deal with the problems associated with mass incarceration. In fact, he is, as Roger again said earlier, he's just returned from a trip to Ferguson, Missouri, where he joined other faith leaders in conversations about how to move forward in that troubled community. Dr. Trulear is a scholar, he is a preacher, he's a teacher, and he's an activist. And we are delighted to have him with us this evening as part of our McClendon Scholar in Residence program to talk about the church and mass incarceration. Please welcome Dr. Trulear.
Thank you, Theo. I want to thank the McClendon program and New York Avenue Presbyterian Church for this kind invitation. It's good to be here tonight. It's good to see so many of you out with interest in this intersection between our faith and our criminal justice system. One thing not on the bio, Theo, is 1000268. That was my inmate number at George W. Hill Correctional Facility, and so for me, this is like a hair club for men. Remember that commercial? The guy says, I'm not just the owner, I'm a client. And so I have been through this experience. No, I'm not one of those folks who had a jailhouse conversion. I was a Christian when I went into prison. Some sins are punishable by law, and as a result, I did time while a Christian. And the fact of the matter is, I think Paul's introduction was very, very on point. You'll hear more about that later in the talk, because there are many, many people in our prisons and jails across the country that are connected to the church. And I would make a bet, given the numbers, that there are more than 3 people who come through New York Presbyterian Church and also the criminal justice system. It's just mathematically impossible for that to be the number. It's just that we haven't dealt with the issue, and the shame and the stigma around it is so great that our response may be at best, Pastor, my son is locked up, pray for me, but don't tell anybody. Now, our mass incarceration, how did we get here? We've gone, this is the 4th era of what I call the evolution of a philosophy of incarceration. We began in this country using incarceration as a tool of punishment. That was the first philosophy. There are these eras where people have different things that they think incarceration is. And so we started off with punishment because we thought that punishment would be a deterrent. One of the things that we have learned over the years is that punishment is not a deterrent to criminal behavior at all. In order for punishment to be effective, 3 things have to be present. It has to be consistent, it has to be severe, and it has to be swift. And incarceration is none of those 3. It's not consistent because sometimes you get away with it and sometimes you don't. Everyone in this room has probably done something that you could have been locked up for. Is that fair? You just haven't gotten caught. So it's not consistent. It has to be swift. In other words, the consequence of punishment has to occur within a very, very short time frame of the action, like putting your hand on an oven. You know not to do that because the consequence is swift. Your hand burns immediately. We have due process. And because we have due process, incarceration is seldom swift. And thirdly, it has to be severe. And when you're poor, some prisons and jails are actually a step up. And for some people in our culture, a time in jail or in prison is actually a sign of maturation and a rite of passage. And so punishment doesn't work, but it was what we started with in this country. Until along came a group of Christians who were interested in incarceration. They wanted to change the face of incarceration. They wanted to change the philosophy of incarceration to repentance. And they created in the early 19th century a type of prison where repentance was the primary goal. And you all know what kind of prison it is. A penitentiary. That's where the word comes from. That's why the cells were so small. The idea was to put an individual in a small cell, give them a Bible and time to reflect on their misdeed so that the inner light could bring to their consciousness the error of their ways. Many penitentiaries not only isolated you with the Bible, but they also forbid you from speaking except for certain times because you're supposed to be engaged in reflection. And what we discovered was if you put a person in a small cell with the Bible by themselves for long periods of time for silence, they don't repent, they go crazy. But it planted the seed that prisons could be a place of change. And so as our nation went through the 19th century and became less overtly religious, the whole notion of the prison as a place where people can change remained, though not from a religious or a conversion perspective, but now from a more secular perspective. And so we shifted from punishment to conversion and repentance to rehabilitation. Rehabilitation came to third frame. That's why we began calling prisons houses of corrections. It's conversion without the God stuff. Interestingly, the only employees you would find in a penitentiary would be the corrections officer, the warden, and the chaplain. And the chaplain would be responsible for all the religious activities and all the social activity. But now, as we move into the 20th century with rehabilitation becoming the norm rather than conversion, you begin to develop social workers, you begin to develop other professionals, teachers, and others who can be part of the rehabilitation process. Now, the rehabilitation process, as we all know, was not as successful as it could have been. In large measure, that was because we really didn't believe in it as a country. We never bought into it. And that's why we were ripe for the fourth phase, which we're in now. And that's the return to punishment. The return to punishment really was ushered in the late 1960s through the candidacy of Richard Nixon to become President of the United States. He championed law and order as the way in which he would win over those conservatives who had been part of the Democratic Party but were not part of the Civil Rights Movement. Michelle Alexander well documents in her book, The New Jim Crow, that the phrase law and order became part of a racialized strategy to separate the races, to keep blacks oppressed, but without using racial language. Hence, the large numbers of African Americans and people of color who have been incarcerated over the last 40 years. Hence, the disproportionate minority confinement that has so plagued the system that it was under the Bush administration, George W. Bush, that the Department of Justice actually created a division on disproportionate minority confinement. When the Republicans are worried that there are too many black people in jail, then maybe it really is an issue. Not only does the current spirit of punishment reflect the idea of a de-racialized strategy to keep people of color in their place, but it also reflects what T. Richard Snyder, the Presbyterian theologian, calls a culture of revenge. We live in a culture where we want to get even. We even have a euphemism for revenge. It's called bringing somebody to justice. When you hear we're going to bring them to justice, you know what they really mean is we're going to get them. We're going to get revenge. We love revenge. We celebrate revenge. We have a holiday that celebrates revenge. It's called Thanksgiving. When we eat as much as we can and then we watch our gladiators knock each other out. And if one of their gladiators knocks one of our gladiators out, what do we want? Revenge. Football becomes the stage in which the violence plays out before our very eyes. Maybe Thanksgiving is the real true American holiday after all, because we celebrate consumption and violence all on the same day. A culture of revenge, says Snyder, has to be reversed. And this is where our faith comes to the fore. Part of what we're charged with doing in dealing with mass incarceration is challenging the culture of revenge and replacing it with Christian principles of redemption and restoration. The challenge is, can we, within our congregations first, and then in the larger culture, develop cultural norms around restoration and redemption that can press back against the dominant culture of revenge. Our numbers indicate that we've been losing this battle since 1968. By the end of 2011, there were 2,266,000 people in America's state and federal prisons and county jails. That's 1 out of every 10 Americans at the end of 2011 was incarcerated. In Washington, D.C., the current numbers, 1,900 under the supervision of the D.C. Department of Corrections, 91% of whom are African American. Anacostia High School in Southeast Washington, 50% of the student body has an incarcerated parent, one school. The District of Columbia sees 2,000 men and women return from incarceration every year. We need a theology of redemption, reconciliation, and restoration. Part of that involves understanding how the system currently dehumanizes. What we saw in Ferguson was dehumanization. What we saw in Staten Island was dehumanization. Now, I was particularly interested in the demonizing of Michael Brown by the police officer, Darren Wilson. I happen to be Pentecostal. We deal with demons all the time. My My home church, Praise and Glory Tabernacle Family Worship Center, which meets in a little storefront in Southwest Philadelphia, has deliverance service every Friday night. We lay hands on people who are demon-possessed and we cast out demons. We haven't shot anybody yet. I don't have any record of, you shoot demons. Doesn't clean the word. But there's a dehumanizing element to the way in which Michael Brown is characterized. Part of what Michelle Alexander is calling for in her book, The New Jim Crow, is what Christians should have been doing all along. And that's in arguing for the full humanity of every individual, including those who are incarcerated. No human being should be defined by the worst thing they've ever done in their life. And that's what we do when we dehumanize inmates, and then we further dehumanize them by labeling them upon their return as ex-offenders. One of the good things that's happened here in the District of Columbia is we don't have ex-offenders anymore. Now we have returning citizens. And I can tell you that that is the direct result of engagement between people of faith from Detroit, Michigan, and the mayor's office back in 2008. It was Christians who were working with ex-offenders who brought the term returning citizens to Washington, D.C. People of faith can have an impact on changing the culture, because what you call somebody determines how you treat them. And so part of what we're arguing for is a change in the culture where we begin to see people differently. Returning citizens, residents of prisons as opposed to inmates and convicts. Using language that is not always putting people down. We don't use the term juvenile justice in our work. We borrow from the Children's Defense Fund. Marian Wright Edelman uses the term youth justice. Because after all, there really is no positive use for the term juvenile. Can you think of one? Juvenile is always negative. Juvenile detention, juvenile court, you're acting like a juvenile. I raised 3 teenagers. Not once did I say, I'd like you to meet my juvenile. Our labeling of people is dehumanizing. And if we as Christians believe that all human beings were created in the image of God, then the reality is that so are inmates, so are people who have been arrested, people who have been locked up, people who are coming home. A theology of redemption calls them by their names, not by their deeds. A theology of redemption recognizes their humanity and does not judge them based on their mistakes. It's really a matter of theological anthropology, how we theologically understand human beings. And that becomes a central part of what we have to do internally to change our cultures so that we're in a position to have an impact on the larger culture. This involves changing names of not only those who are returning from incarceration, but it also means viewing ourselves differently as we understand who they are when they come back to us. What do I mean? Most of us objectify people on the margin by creating special ministries for them. And so we have a prison ministry. We're going to do outreach to the prison. That means that some people are called to prison ministry and some people aren't. I want to argue that everybody's called to prison ministry. Because prisoners and sick people are in the same list in Matthew 25. Yet if you get sick, your whole church gets mobilized. People call, people visit, they send you cards, they check on your family. If you get locked up, you get 3 volunteers from somebody else's prison, somebody else's church rather. And usually it's the junior varsity. I'm not trying to insult any of you that are involved in prison ministry, but when I was an inmate, I heard and I'm a seminary professor. I'm an expert in bad sermons. And I heard the worst sermons that I never heard when I was an inmate. One guy comes in and says, when you wake up in the morning and look in the mirror, what do you see? And we all said, nothing. There are no mirrors. how do we mobilize entire congregations around prison ministry as opposed to seeing it as the specialized province of a few trained volunteers and professional chaplains? That's the question we've been trying to raise in the Healing Communities movement, and there's information on our project in your folder. We've been trying to say, how do we move from having a prison ministry to being a church that's connected to the system? How do we move from having a reentry ministry to being a reentry church? And then how do we move beyond service to individuals to having a voice of advocacy? Now, some people are trying and making the choice. They say, we're going to do service and then we're going to do advocacy. The reality is that they're intertwined. The fact of the matter is, if you're serving someone and you begin to collect the stories of the people you're serving and the stories are all the same, then you've moved from what C. Wright Mills calls the personal trial to a public issue. Every public issue is the amalgamation of personal trials. Martin Luther King used to often say, if you're pulling people out of the water because they're drowning, eventually you have to find out why everybody's falling in the water. And so service and advocacy are not divisible. When we serve people, we ought to be counting the stories to create the issue. At the same time, if you want to move right into advocacy, all of the data indicates that if you're not serving the population for whom you're advocating, you will not be able to amass a movement. Let me say that again, because I know I'm talking to some advocacy people here. Why won't the church move around this? The church won't move around this for the very reason that Paul mentioned. You can't build a movement around an issue. You build a movement around people. If you don't know the people that are incarcerated, if you don't know the people that are impacted by incarceration, you're not going to be able to mobilize people around them. One of the things we've been doing is we've been going around the country trying to give churches tools so they can identify the folks from their own congregation that are incarcerated. I was locked up with 4 guys from my church. I tried to be incognito. I don't want anybody to know that there was a preacher in jail. And so I didn't tell anybody my name. I just kind of went along. I got me a little nickname, Doc, because that people call each other that in our churches. So I became Doc. Until one day I was laying on my bunk and a young man came by and he said, "Pastor?" I said, "Who wants to know?" He told me his name. I said, "I don't know you." He said, "I used to play drums in your choir." I don't know you. He said, "My mother's name." He told me his mother's name. His mother had been on my staff. So at that point, I couldn't hide anymore. By the time I got out of there, I met 3 more guys whose mothers I had pastored. In fact, I actually met 2 guys whose cousin I had pastored, and then another guy I met whose wife I had pastored through their divorce. He didn't like me very much until he got to know me. And so for our middle-class suburban congregation to say, "Oh, we don't have anybody like that from our church," I met 7 people on my block, not in my jail, whose mothers went to church Sunday after Sunday and suffered in silence because the issue of their kids' incarceration was never addressed. And they were ashamed to tell their pastor, they were ashamed to tell their friends. They developed all kinds of euphemisms. He's away in college. He's in the service. He's down south. We just launched our project in Savannah, Georgia. I asked them, I said, "Well, we've been up in Pennsylvania, we said they're down south." What do you all say? They said, "We say them up north." Because of the shame and the stigma surrounding incarceration. If we're going to change the culture, we have to deal with the shame and the stigma. We have to make the prisoner human. We have to make the situation normal. And we have to destigmatize individuals who've been incarcerated. One of my students at Howard told me that she just couldn't deal with inmates. That's something that just creeped her out. She got picked up for speeding and had to actually sit in a holding cell. And she was so creeped out by this, she said, I'll never go near a prison again. That's not part of my ministry. I said, well, if you don't like inmates, isn't it kind of hard to be a Christian? And she said, what are you talking about? I said, can I borrow your Bible? She said, why? I said, I want to show you something. I said, first of all, I want to show you the book of Genesis. Now, if you can't deal with inmates, you got to take the book of Genesis out because Joseph was an inmate. If you don't like inmates, you got to take out the book of Jeremiah because Jeremiah was in solitary confinement. If you don't like inmates, you got to get rid of the book of Daniel because Daniel was a two-time loser and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were on death row. If you don't like inmates, you got to get rid of the book of Revelation because John wrote that while he was locked up. If you don't like inmates, you got to get rid of 1st and 2nd Peter. If Peter got locked up, the church did pray for him all night long, but when God gave him early release and he came back to church, they wouldn't let him in. Things haven't changed. If you don't like inmates, you can't run around telling people I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me because it was written by an inmate. If you don't like inmates, you can't deal with John the Baptist. And if you don't like inmates, what do you do with Jesus because he was in custody when he was crucified? We're the only religion that has a holiday for inmates. Good Friday. I had a deacon come and correct me. I don't know if you're a Baptist. The Baptists have this thing called the deacon, and his role is to correct the preacher. And so I was making this point in a presentation in Wilmington, Delaware, and the deacon came up to me and corrected me because he wanted me to know that all of the examples I used were good people who had been locked up for righteous causes. And that what we're talking about are bad people. And so I thought about that for a while, and I said, well, Deacon, is that like the guy who was walking down the street one day and he saw one of his friends being beaten up by his boss and he jumped in the middle and killed the boss? He said, yeah, that's a manslaughter charge. I said, yeah, that's Moses. Or the musician who was looking out the window one day and he saw a beautiful woman. Oh, she's so beautiful, I'm going to write a song about her. The Lord is my shepherd. I see what I want. Who is that? Her name is Bathsheba. I got to give her Bathsheba. You can't do that. She's married. She's got somebody. Her husband's in the service. Well, we can arrange a little accident for Mr. Serviceman. I believe they call that conspiracy to commit murder. Paul would have been an accessory to murder. And what would have happened to Peter in 2014 America?
Wow, talk about it.
Pulling a knife on a law enforcement official. Jesus would have had to perform 2 miracles. He'd have had to heal the cop's ear and raise Peter from the dead. If you can't deal with inmates, the Bible is not for you because it's filled with stories of redemption of people who did time. And we talk about that in congregations because we're trying to normalize the reality that incarceration impacts us all. And our Bible, our sacred text, is filled with examples of people that God used despite the fact that they did time. We're working on trying to identify families. One of the things that we did in Kingston, New York this past Sunday was we did an altar call for families of the incarcerated. Half the congregation came forward, and we prayed together. These were men and women who finally had an opportunity to say, yes, my son, my grandson, my uncle, my nephew, my father is incarcerated, and I need help. I need someone to walk with me through the experience. You'll be surprised at some of the people in your church. It's not a black male issue, it's a white issue as well, because half of the people that are incarcerated in this country are white. And since 2010, we've seen a change in the demographics in that African American incarceration has begun to go down a bit, and Latino incarceration began to go down a little bit, and white male incarceration has begun to go down a little bit, but the only population that continues to rise is white women. The population of white women in state and federal prisons has escalated so much that the New York Times in August of 2013 sent an investigative reporter to Ohio to find out why are so many white women being locked up. And they discovered several things. First of all, at least half of all white women who are locked up were victims of domestic or sexual violence at some point in their life. Secondly, that many of them have resorted to self-medication as a result of the trauma from the violence in which they were victims. And thirdly, Well, I'll put it this way. When somebody tells me my daughter got locked up, I always ask, what's his name? Did you get that? 80% of the time, there's a he. And in the desire to please him, in the desire to belong to him, in the desire to attract him, behaviors that can result in incarceration become attractive as well. So, you have people in your church who have incarcerated family members. It's almost mathematically impossible that you don't. Identifying the families through altar calls, identifying the families through listing their names in the bulletin. We list the sick people in the bulletin. We can list the incarcerated in the bulletin. We can list people on trial. If you begin listing people who are going into the system, people who have been arrested, people who are facing incarceration, and you walk with them during that time period, they stand a better chance of having reduced sentences, alternative sentencing, because if the judge knows that an individual has support, she or he, in many cases, will do whatever they can to make sure you stay close to that support. I went to county jail instead of state prison because my church showed up. My judge read letters into the record and said, I don't want him far away from his support system. And so I got 1 to 2 county instead of 1 to 5 state. We had 2 churches in New Jersey who had members released on time served because their churches showed up at the hearings, at the trials, and at the sentencing. But of course, in order for them to do that, the culture of the congregation had to change so that it was all right for mom to come and say, my son got arrested, we need help. And that's possible if we do things the right way. We also know that people who get visits while they're incarcerated do better than people who don't. Many, and again, this goes back to the shame issue. Many people say, well, if you get locked up, I'm not going to come see you. You're my son, I love you, but I'm warning you, if you get locked up, I'm not coming. It's the worst thing you can say. The fact of the matter is that we know that visitation has a positive impact on reducing recidivism. And the number 1 category of visit that reduces recidivism is not mothers, it's not fathers, it's clergy. When clergy visit, not go to preach, but when they visit, not run Bible study, but when they visit, not when they go to run a program, but visit, a pastoral care visit, it reduces recidivism. The second highest category for reducing recidivism is fathers, when fathers visit. Third is siblings, when siblings visit. And that's kind of intuitive. If you had a brother or sister growing up, you all had this experience. Your mother or your father told you something, and you didn't want to hear it, then you and your sibling went in the next room, and they said to you, you know she's right. Yeah, I know. Siblings have influence. The 4th category is in-laws. And I don't know why. I have no idea. I guess if your mother-in-law comes to see you, you're a pretty good guy to begin with. I have no idea why an in-law visit reduces recidivism. But all visits, except for 1 category, reduce recidivism. And the 1 category is exes. People who get visited by their ex actually are more likely to recidivate. I'll let you play with that. But we can all visit. We can help families to stay together through visitation. We can help families to stay together by helping them with the finances to go visit or by driving them to a facility. We can even put money on an inmate's books in order to keep the family together so that the inmate can make phone calls home. The idea is to become familiar with the people in order to build the movement for the advocacy. If you're not involved with the people, if you're not involved with the population, it's very hard to start a movement. It's interesting. When I read the newspapers, when I hear the speeches, People are always saying that the most important thing that somebody needs when they come home is a job. How many of you have heard that? And next after that is housing, right? Jobs and housing, the two most important things. I can tell you, my PhD is in sociology, so we do number stuff, right? Jobs and housing, they're fourth and fifth. They're fourth and fifth. The top three things, number one, change in attitude. You have to look at the world differently. Number two, changing your decision-making process. You have to make decisions that consider the consequences. Impulsivity is a primary criminogenic need. People make decisions without thinking about what's going to happen. And number three is a network of support, of pro-social support, to reinforce the values change and clarification that's going on in the individual deciding that they want to live their life differently when they come home. Attitude, decision-making, social network. I can argue it another way. I can tell you that if I get you a job when you come home, if I get you a house when you come home, and you still think the same way, and you still hang with the same people, you're going to lose the house and the job. Close to 60% of all African American males who are incarcerated were working legitimate jobs when they were arrested. And so this idea that if we get everybody a job, we'll get rid of mass incarceration, it simply does not bear up to the numbers. Now, the last time I looked, talking about attitudes, talking about decision-making processes, talking about social networks of support, the last time I looked, those were all three things that churches do. Which means that the institution that is best suited to deal with the reentry and recidivism problem, that has the most resources, natural resources, not artificial resources, but natural resources, to deal with the recidivism issue, is you. You're better poised in the job training industry, you're better poised in the housing industry, because you meet the three basic criminogenic needs for people coming home from prison. The problem is you're not connected. But you have what it takes. Changing in attitudes, I think we call that conversion. Changing in decision-making, I think we call that discipline. Actually, Christians really aren't that good at discipline. I mean, if we were that good at discipline, we wouldn't shop the way we shop, we wouldn't eat the way we eat. But, that said, it is a biblical principle. And social networks is simply loving our neighbor. We have the resources to deal with recidivism. We just haven't been connected. In remaking this connection, however, we position ourselves not only to reduce the recidivism rate, but then to hear the stories of men and women coming home whose amalgam leads us to deal with policy issues. Issues like alternative sentencing. Issues like collateral sanctions. Collateral sanctions are the things that you have to deal with once you've come home, and they say you've paid your debt to society, but in some places you can't vote. They say you've paid your debt to society, but in some places you have to check a box when you apply for a job. They say you've paid your debt to society, but there's certain federal financial aid you're not eligible for if you want to go to college. They say you've paid your debt to society, but there's certain housing that you're not allowed to live in. They say you've paid your debt to society, but there's certain jobs you can't have. In a number of states in this country, including Illinois, Iowa, and Florida, for example, anyone with a felony conviction cannot be a barber or a cosmetologist. The state does not want to give you a license to have scissors. Now, you know, I've seen postal workers, right? We have people going postal, but no one's gone barber lately. My barber did a 10-year bid for third-degree murder. He killed somebody. And I'm not afraid when he has a razor in my neck. Because somebody believed in him enough to walk with him through a period of transformation which his religious tradition, which was Islam, his religious tradition undergirded. But someone was present with him. And so now this man who killed somebody right in front of a church holds a razor to the neck of hundreds of people every week, and there's no problem. But he couldn't do that if he lived in Florida, or Illinois, or Iowa. These are called collateral sanctions, and every jurisdiction has its own set. It's something that's set at the state level. So the district would have one set, Virginia Commonwealth would have one set, the state of Maryland would have another set, because those are decisions that are made at the state level. When we collect the stories, we're in a position to become advocates. And when we become advocates, we're actually getting involved in systems change. And that's the last thing I want to leave you with as a framework, and we'll talk more specifics later. When I went to Ferguson, I went because of an incident. 40 of us, led by Jim Wallace and Sojourners, wanted to talk with faith leaders and social activists on the ground about what was happening there. And we discovered two things. First is that the faith community is not leading the movement in Ferguson. It's the millennials. That what this one incident has done is it has politicized millennials in ways that they've never experienced before. And so what the faith community is doing is they're pastoring the millennials as the millennials lead. They're providing counsel, they're providing direction. Several churches are open. One church is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It has been ever since the day Michael Brown was killed. You can go there for a safe haven. You can go there for food. You can go there if you're tear gassed, because there'll be a medical professional on duty to attend to your medical needs if you've got the eye problems or the stomach problems that come from tear gas, or if you've been shot with a rubber bullet like several clergy have been. That church is open 24/7 and available for people who are on the ground and in the street in the movement. Second thing that we learned is that this politicization of the millennials in Ferguson is not simply around Michael Brown. They've discovered that they're up against a system. And they're looking at everything from the electoral system in Ferguson to how police are being trained to how county government functions. For them, it's a systems issue. They get it. That it's not enough to get justice for Michael Brown. It's not enough to get Darren Wilson off the police force. It wouldn't have been enough had he been indicted. There are whole systems that need to change. How the voting has been set up in Ferguson so that people do the municipal voting in off years to minimize turnout so that the people who've been in power for years can stay there. That's why Ferguson is 67% African American and has a white mayor and has pretty much a white municipal government, because the voting occurs for Ferguson in off years in the springtime, not even in November. They see the need for systems change in the school system because they understand that one of the reasons that young people are having problems in their community is because half of them go to an unaccredited school system. Did you know there was such a thing? That there can actually be public school systems that are not accredited by the state. And so what they're mounting is a movement that's about changing the system. Even if Darren Wilson had been indicted, even if Darren Wilson had been convicted and incarcerated, their movement would continue because they understand that if you don't change the system, there'll be more. Because the parts are interchangeable in a broken system. They are working to try to make things different for a whole host of folks. One of the things they don't understand is how the church can be a place of liberation, and yet some of the churches won't participate in the movement because one of the pastors who's at the forefront is female. And the other thing they don't understand is how the church can be at the forefront of liberation for them as young black millennials when the churches reject LGBT membership. They're saying that we're not just about Michael Brown, and we're not just about what happened to him, and we're not just about young black males and young black females. We're about a system that's been unfair to a lot of people. And so we came away from Ferguson with a very different sense of what's going on, and the need for the church to be listening to that population that's articulate, needs more capacity in order to do systems change, and that's where the church is helping walk alongside them. And also is willing to help shape this latent discontent into some solid political action. The situation looks difficult. Looking at inmates sometimes looks difficult. Imagining them in any other state than being incarcerated sometimes is difficult. When I talk to churches, I talk to a lot of parents that have given up on their incarcerated children. You don't know what I've been through, he's not going to change. And I tell them about John Lamb. John Lamb is a very significant person. John Lamb is a significant person because I remember when I was growing up, and I'm looking around, some of you remember this too. You couldn't take a picture when I was growing up. Anybody remember those days? You couldn't take a picture, you had to take the whole.
Yeah.
See, now you just pull out your camera and you snap a picture, that picture. When I was growing up, you had to take 12 pictures. Or 24 pictures. Or 36 pictures. And then you take that roll of film down to the drugstore, and you give it to the guy behind the counter, and you go back home, and then you wait for a whole week. And then they might call you, you might call them, and the picture would come back, and you have to go back to the drugstore, and you finally have that picture. It took you a week to get your pictures back until John Land came along. And John Land invented a camera called Polaroid. And when the Polaroid came out, you could take one picture, and then it would make this little zit sound, right? And then you take the back off the camera. Is everybody ready? Shake until it dried out and you had your picture. You had your moment finally froze in time. And here's the problem with mass incarceration. Here's the problem with dehumanizing inmates. Here's the problem with calling them names and judging them based on the worst incident in their life. It's a Polaroid.
Right.
And God's got the DVD.
Right.
And until we're willing to look at them through the eyes of the DVD, there's a beginning and there's an ending. It's not over yet. Until we're willing to throw away the Polaroids and the frozen moments in time and begin to view people through the DVD, we're never going to move on this issue. Nobody brings a child into the world and says, you're going to grow up to go to prison. Nobody believes that their child is going to be an inmate at birth. I was reading the other day about a young man's birth, a baby's birth. And when he was born, nobody expected him to become an inmate. In fact, when he was born, angels started singing glory to God in the highest and peace to his people on earth. Nobody knew that one day he'd be an inmate. When he was born, shepherds left their flocks by night and came to see where the young child lay. Nobody knew that one day he would be an inmate. Scholars came from Persia following a star that they had heard about by reading the curriculum written by Daniel 500 years earlier. Nobody knew that one day he would be an inmate. When he was 12 years old, he was so bright that he was reasoning with the scholars in the temple. Nobody expected him to become an inmate. When he was 30 years old and baptized, the Spirit of God descended upon him, and God said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Nobody knew that one day he would be an inmate. He picked up a filet of fish sandwich, turned it into a whole McDonald's. Nobody expected that one day he would be an inmate. But on a Thursday night, he was arrested. On a Thursday night, see, we're getting ready to celebrate the first night of his life, but the first night of his life was nothing about the last night of his life. And on the last night of his life, he was in custody, tried, convicted, executed. But one of the reasons that we're here today is on the third day he got early release. If you have a Polaroid on Good Friday, it's all over. But we serve the God of the DVD. And the best is yet to come. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trulear. We built in some time now for just a few minutes for you to talk with each other. We're going to have a question period in a moment, but what we would like you to do is just think about what you've heard. As you see on the instruction sheet when you look at it in a moment, I ask you to just take a few moments and reflect. What was the most important or powerful thing that you heard in this presentation for you? Think about that a bit and then talk about it at your tables. There's some other suggested questions on your instruction sheet if you want to look at those too. But begin with this question about just what you got from this presentation. What was you think most important for you or most powerful? And then as you get near the end of the conversation, I'll give you a couple minutes or a warning. I urge you to think a little bit about also what would you like to hear more about? Or what questions do you have for Dr. Trulear? Because after this short conversation at the tables, we're going to come back and ask him some questions. And so as you come to the end of your own conversation, think a bit about what would I like him to talk more about that he mentioned or like more, or what questions you have. So let's all begin just with a few seconds of quiet reflection on this whole issue and what we've heard. Think what was most powerful for you, and then after that moment of reflection, begin talking at your tables for 10 or 12 minutes or so. Obviously, you could have talked at much greater length about what was presented. We want to just give you a chance to share some of your initial thoughts and to hear from others at your table. We've got a few minutes now where we want to hear a little bit more from Dr. Trulear, and either by just asking him to talk a little more about something he said, or if you have a particular question for him. We unfortunately have only one microphone, which is here in the middle. So I'm going to note and see who would like to ask questions and ask maybe 2 or 3 at a time to go there. We don't want a big long line or anything, but you do need to use the microphone. The acoustics are not very good here. So who has a question for Dr. Trulear? If there are 2 or 3 who want to go first here and line behind the microphone. And keep your questions brief, please. Just get, what is it you'd like them to talk more about or the crux of the question. And we'll talk together for a while here as you have questions. Yes?
Thank you for your many wise and moving comments. This weekend is the National Gun Violence Sabbath. So I'm trying to hold this emergence in our public consciousness of what my friend calls the criminal system. We used to call it the criminal justice system. And the shooting of black men. And I'm part of a community that does a vigil every month at the National Rifle Association. A lot of very nice white people walk in a circle for 2 hours and try to remember anyway, I'm needing help finding language and I wonder if you connecting gun violence, the sort of white supremacy energy of the NRA movement and the police forces that are the people who have so many weapons. Is there a connection here you could help me make? It's important to keep them.
In order, by the way, I'm from Pennsylvania, which has the highest registration of NRA membership in any state in the country. Pennsylvania, not Louisiana, not Mississippi. That's all. understand, James Carville was almost right when he said Pennsylvania is Pittsburgh to the west, Philadelphia to the east, and Mississippi in between. And I've got 2 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and a granddaughter that live in Mississippi. It's part of a city called Harrisburg. Violence is a part of our culture. That's why I made the statement I did about Thanksgiving. I mean, it's something we celebrate. We live in a triumphalist society. We like to win. And we will do whatever we can to win. Malcolm X said by any means necessary, and folks are scared. People forget that George Bush said by any means necessary to stand behind the pulpit at the National Cathedral on September 15th, 2011. Same words. But when you're the good guys, by any means necessary, it simply means that we're going to do whatever it takes for good to triumph, and that means us, the United States. I think that the culture of revenge is part of who we are as a nation across ethnic lines. One of the things we know when we start talking about the effective reduction of gun violence in poor communities, the 2 initiatives, one out of Boston, one out of Chicago, that have been proven the most effective, treat gun violence by interrupting the cycle of revenge. I step on your foot, you punch me in the face, I stab you, you shoot me, I shoot you, your friends shoot my friends. If we do the conflict resolution work in the very beginning of the conflict, then we may save 10 lives. So that's a factor of revenge. People think that drugs are the #1 cause of violence in the community. No. The #1 cause of violence in the community is the inability to settle disagreements. 38% of all homicides stem from disagreements. It's the #1 cause. Similarly, when police are trained from a military perspective, and I'm not saying this on my own, there's a great piece by the retired chief of police for Seattle that came out in McClatchy.com a couple of days ago. Read that to hear a career law enforcement officer say this. I'm quoting him. I'm paraphrasing him. When police become military, that means there's an enemy. And police were not designed for enemies. He said we're here to protect and serve. We are not soldiers. If you're in the army, there's an enemy. And as soon as you adopt a militaristic posture, you have made it impossible to serve the people that you're there to protect. So it's a training, it's a systemic thing. When we do that kind of work. I was in Ferguson last week, and then I went to New York. And the difference was night and day in terms of how the New York City police handled the protesters versus the way the Ferguson. We rode by the Ferguson police station, and you thought it was a military base. They were lined, it was 9 o'clock at night, they were lined up, guarding the fort. Police, National Guard, side by side, full armor. I mean, it was incredible. A chill went down my spine when I saw that. They wouldn't do that anymore. Yeah.
A beautiful presentation. I think one of the finest presentations on this topic to a mixed group that I've heard. Now I would like to hear you figure in race into the equation of incarceration, because I don't have to worry about driving while white, walking the streets while white, others do. And there is unequal justice in this country.
I tell my white friends that the one thing I had to do that they didn't was to teach my sons how to be pulled over by the cops as part of their driving lessons. You know, that's, you know, we practiced. We all know, most of you know, of course, that Michelle Alexander has well documented the fact that the Nixon campaign in 1968 included developing a system of incarceration as a non-racialized way to maintain the oppression over blacks. H.R. Haldeman said, Nixon has it in his tapes, it's recorded. H.R. Haldeman says we've got to find a way to deal with the blacks without using the terms. So, it's a clear and present racial strategy, number one. Number two, when you dehumanize, and racism dehumanizes, and that's part of what all of the sociological literature and all the theological literature. One of my professors in graduate school was a man named George Kelsey, who was Martin Luther King's advisor, undergrad at Morehouse. Kelsey wrote a book called Christianity and Racism and the Christian Understanding of Man, 65. And Kelsey argued that racism is actually faith that gives meaning to the racist. My humanity as a white man is defined by my whiteness, and your lack of humanity as a black man is defined by your blackness. That's my faith. I believe that it gives me value to say that I'm better than you. And so we've constructed these meaning systems where white is norm and everything else. I went to Morehouse. They call Morehouse the Black Harvard. Why don't they call Harvard the White Morehouse? You know, because white is normal. Same as with men, right? Male is normal, female is derivative, right? I can prove it to you. How many of you went to a college where the women's teams had lady in front of the mascot? The lady this, the lady that, the lady that. How come the men don't have the male this, the male that? I teach at Howard University. We have the men of the bison and the women of the lady bison. That's because one kind of being is normative and the other is derivative. I mean, sometimes it's actually ridiculous. I mean, there's a college out in Western Maryland whose mascot is the Rams. And the women's teams are called the Lady Rams. But it's built into the fiber. It's built into the fiber, and until you can challenge that fiber, until you can challenge that systemic group. I mean, Band-Aids, right? Flesh-colored Band-Aids. What's that stuff you use for ivy poison? Calamine lotion. Why is it pink? It's for you. Because you're pink. That's the norm, and until we can change and challenge the norm, racism is going to continue. It's not a matter of just individuals, it's systemic, it's cultural.
Time for a couple other questions. Do you have one?
Yes. Doctor, I appreciate what you said today. I've spent my whole professional career in the field of corrections. And the time that I spent a lot of my time was, at one time I was a superintendent of the Lord Youth Center. And at that time, our sentences were indeterminate. It was a very unique setting. So basically, an offender, a juvenile offender, was placed in the institution from 60 days to 6 years. And myself, as the superintendent, our staff that worked together as a treatment staff, we determined through a person's behavior, their attitude, their work. We brought a college program in, could be released when they met their goals. Now that fits into your whole concept of the 5 things you have to do to be successful when you come out. Well, you know what happened, and I happened to have been there when Nixon said it's the end of that. We were building halfway houses and doing all kinds of things in this community. This is D.C. But what's happening now, I think we have another opportunity because the overcrowding in the prisons has caused such a bankruptcy to our money that all kinds of people are now saying we've got to do something about the prisons. It's not for the right reason. We can use this as a wonderful opportunity to go back to the concept of how do you work your way out by getting to the position where you can be successful in our community. So, Paul.
No, I agree with you. Two things. One is just to illustrate, there's a conservative think tank in Texas called Right on Crime. And it's a play on words because they want to be right on crime, but they also are right. Okay, as in, this costs too much, and it's bad policy. Okay, so it's a group of conservative thinkers who are working on criminal justice reform. As far as reforming corrections here, Monday, I think it was Monday of this week, but within the last week, there's been a task force on federal criminal justice reform that has been appointed by the Obama administration. It's named after Chuck Colson, the Chuck Colson Task Force. You can look up who's on there online. One of the people on there is John Wetzel. John Wetzel is the Secretary of Corrections for Pennsylvania, where I live. And John and I also serve on the executive session on community corrections at Harvard University. And he's a very forward-thinking person. And he was part of a group of people that were taken by the Vera Institute to visit prisons in the Netherlands and in Germany. And here's where this fits into what you're talking about. John came back astounded because in those two prisons, those two countries, the training to become a CO, a corrections officer, is 2 years. How long is it here?
1 year.
1 year training?
1 year training.
Okay. They go through a 2-year training program, and their program is the equivalent of a Master of Social Work. Because what they're training corrections officers to do is to not be security officers, but to be change agents, and to create a different kind of atmosphere within the prison that humanizes people. I read when I was locked up. I hadn't read a novel in years, and I needed to kill some time. So somebody handed me The Dragon Girl, Dragon Tattoo, Dragon Tattoo. How many of you read Girl with the Dragon Tattoo? All right, right. Some people see the movie. The reason I mentioned the book is, I'm laying on my bunk, right, and I'm reading the opening chapter, and the protagonist, whatever his name is typing something on his laptop while he's in jail. And I'm like, you got a laptop? In jail? And they're wearing their own clothes? And I'm like, but he's in jail, and I'm in jail, I've got a laptop. These damn sure ain't my clothes. I'm just sorry for the language, but, it slips sometimes. And so I'm really, and then when I heard Wetzel talk about what the prisons were like that he saw, and how they humanize people, and how the mothers get, if you give birth in prison, you get to keep your child for up to 3 years. Whereas in this country, we still have 17 states that shackle women when they give birth.
Not Virginia anymore.
Thank God, maybe it's down to 16. But but if it's 16, that's 16 too many. Now Wes was talking about maybe letting women keep their baby. 1 out of 25 women is pregnant when they go to prison. 1 out of 25 is pregnant when they report. So the kind of humanizing programs that you're talking about, that you had here in Washington in your juvenile probation department when my friend Vinny Shirali was head of juvenile work here. Great guy. Vinny's doing that work in New York now. She's now the top law enforcement advisor to the mayor of New York. And unlike so many people in corrections, Vinny didn't come up from the CO ranks. Vinny was a social worker. And so, he thinks, he says, I do parole, I do probation. Parole and probation is supposed to help people. I'm not supposed to be an extension of the prison. So he's moving all the probation officers into the community. Found out where the neighborhoods that people are from, and now all the probation officers in the city of New York are being moved into the neighborhoods where people actually live, and there are community advisory boards surrounding each probation office so that the community actually is working along with the PO in helping to do the supervision and the community reintegration.
We have time for one more quick question, if there is one. And then we're going to go back to a short table discussion. Coming close to wrapping up here, but just stay with us a few more minutes here as we conclude.
I'll try to put my answer short too.
My name is Una, and I'd like to ask you to talk first, for me especially, some more about the theology of redemption and reconciliation, so I can take it back to my church.
Sure.
Thank you.
The gospel teaches that Christ died for the world. That means, at minimum, that every human being in the world was worth dying for. So, no matter what a person has done, Christ paid for that. And though there are always consequences to our sins, there is always the possibility of new life. And so, what the theology of redemption means is that people who may have committed crimes are worth saving and worth redeeming, and God has not given up on them. Now, how we act that out involves our walking with them and demonstrating that we believe they're worth redeeming by treating them as if they were already redeemed. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for the ungodly. I serve on a committee in New York. We do a faith and reentry conference every year. There are 8 of us on the committee. There's a prison chaplain. There is a woman whose husband did 17 and a half years for murder. There's me. They call me skid bit. Skid bit is a phrase for a little short time. I only did a year, so that's a skid bit. Everybody else on that committee has a body. Every other person on that committee killed somebody, and one of them killed a cop. They're all home. They all have degrees. One guy the cop killer has 2 master's degrees. One guy did 8 years for arson murder. He's now working on his doctorate of ministry and is director of diversity for the LaGuardia County Community College. Now, here's what each one of these guys will tell you. Each one of these guys will tell you that key to their success was that somebody believed they were worth saving. And somebody walked with them through their transition. Not preached to them, not did a Bible study with them. Somebody walked with them through their transition and helped them to get where they are. The guy who's a pastor will tell you that there were 3 black churches that came and did service every Sunday and 1 white church. And it was the white church that was waiting for him when he got out. And these were all conservative, evangelical, Republican, Obama-hating, really, all that. He said, so when I go over to their house, I just don't talk politics. But they were the ones that were there for me. They walked me through the whole process. Not the liberal Presbyterian church and not the African American churches. It was the fundamentalists that walked. So the theology of redemption is everyone's worth saving, and that means that we have to walk with them as if they were.
Thank you so much. Getting near our time of closing. We're going to run 5 minutes, maybe 10 at the very most, past 8:30, but I promise it won't linger past that. We want to have just one last time for you to talk together. Just again, trying to ramp up what your thoughts are, but particularly with a thought about the question of what can I do? what can my congregation do? And you're not going to resolve all of that in just a few short minutes here, but it's a conversation you may already be in, or maybe it's one you're just starting. We need to all be thinking about what our response is to this as Christians, and what can we do? We can all do something, and our congregations can all do something and do something more. So take just a moment to do this. I point out we don't have enough time for a long conversation, but just share some of your thoughts about what you'd like to do. I point out that in the right side, there is a list of some examples of things that churches in Washington are doing with returning citizens. And I know someone is going to pass around from the Coming Church folks a handout they're going to bring by, so might have some other interest on that. Yeah.
Beck Estelle from Becoming Church is going to make a brief discussion of something coming up nearly immediately. So,
yes, and I think this paper that's coming around has that information. If you want to highlight it real quickly, because we do want to get to a discussion here.
My name is Pastor Becca Stell, and I'm with an effort called Becoming Church and Why We Can't Wait. And in January, our mission is around issues of mass incarceration and reentry. In January, we're starting kind of a community center, a reentry center, a reconciliation center, which we're calling Reunion. And Reunion is going to be in Adams, Morgan. And just really briefly, it'll be about 4 different things. One is so much to the points that Dr. Trulear made tonight. One is to be a place for new relationships and a new way of thinking for people coming home. Another is recognizing that it's not just people coming home who need new relationships and a new way of thinking. We all need new relationships and a new way of thinking around us. So a place of education and information for people who have not been exposed directly to the issue of incarceration. Third, it'll be a resource center for us to send people for additional services, including church communities. So we want to be connected to church communities who embody some of the things that have been mentioned tonight. And finally, we want to be seeding advocacy and different ways of change, including we want to be a place where we can practice restorative justice circles and start to practice that in the city. So we're having a meeting this Saturday, and the flyer that's going around has more information, including information about our meeting on Saturday, and we would love for any and all of you to be a part of. Thanks.
You see on the purple sheet some other examples of what some congregations are doing. Take 5 or 6 minutes. Just talk briefly, get your own thoughts about response. And the other thing is, this is the time where I'd like you to go back to your registration and response form, and go ahead and fill in some of your comments in terms of response there. There's some just general questions about what you got from the program, and then at the bottom, some things you can indicate where you have interest. And we ask you to fill it out and leave it with us, because we want to get a sense of the kinds of things folks want to do as we shape responses to this. So make sure you filled out the registration form and take a couple minutes. But take 5 minutes now and just talk together about some of your thoughts about response, you individually, or what your congregation might do.
I'd like to know who we are. But this is really cool. I was offering that.
longer to talk. I can tell there's a lot of energy to do that. You're certainly free to talk informally for a while until they kick us out, which I think it'll be about 9 o'clock. But we do need to close here, and I want to hear one last time from briefly Dr. Trulear, and then have our benediction. Again, please make sure you've at least filled out the top part, the registration. Leave this on the table. You can take the other materials with you, but leave the registration response form. And we'd love it if you would give us some feedback on the program, what was valuable to you on a 1 to 5 scale, and then any indication of actions you're interested in. Really helps us. We'll tally. We're going to be looking for ideas about actions and other programs we can do. And we see this not as an end, but as a beginning. This issue, of course, is not going away. It's at the center of the national consciousness. It's just going to grow. Numerous congregations are represented here tonight who are already involved, and others want to get more involved. So we see this as a beginning of action to something that really can make a turning in the country. And I really believe we're at a point where there's an opportunity for that. So thank you for your participation. I want to call Dr. Trulear up one more time just for some brief comments. And then I'd ask Joe Daniels, the pastor of Emory Methodist Fellowship, who's also here to close with a benediction after this. But Dr. Trulear, a final word?
Sure. Really appreciative of this opportunity. Familiar faces like Becca Steele and Doug Walker was here a little while ago. He's the Healing Community, that's our project. He was our Healing Community's rep for the Methodist Church. Just a brief commercial, our brochure is in your packet, and if you're interested in having us come and do the 6-hour training on how to become a healing community as a congregation, we'd love to come to any congregation or group of congregations to do that kind of work. What we're finding is that there are so many people around this country who have been touched by the criminal justice system in some way, shape, or form. And except for the people who are making money off of it, none of them are satisfied. Except for the people that are making money off of it, none of them are satisfied. It's just a matter of servicing the discontent and organizing it, and I believe that we can really make change. So you actually have my contact information on the brochure also, so if you're looking for a card and I've run out of cards, there's a phone number, and I don't know if my email's on the brochure, but there's ways of contacting me. You can always look at it out. So, good. Thank you so much. And you encourage me with this kind of a turnout that change not only is possible, but is happening. So God bless.
And we invite you to come forward and talk with Dr. Trulear if you wish. We'd stay for a few minutes and chat informally. And Reverend Daniels, if you lead us in our benediction.
May we all stand and join hands with someone near to us. Let us pray. God, how good it is when brothers and sisters dwell together in unity. We're so grateful for tonight and for everything that has been shared, discussed, planted, and even fruit that's bearing itself mightily and powerfully tonight. We ask your blessing upon Dean Trulear. We pray that you would fill him back up as he has poured out so mightily and powerfully. May your anointing be fresh within him, fresh upon him, to continue to serve your kingdom in the capacity in which you have given him to serve. We thank you for this wonderful host church and the wonderful McClendon Scholar Program, the wonderful senior pastor of this church, Pastor Roger Gench, and for all the pastors and congregations that are represented here, all the organizations, and all the folks who just came because we dare to believe that our city and our region and our country can be a place where every barrier is broken and every bridge is built, that we might be one together in spirit and justice and unity and opportunity. Now, God, would you bless us as we leave this place, that we might take what we have learned and go bless somebody else. For you have blessed us to be a blessing to others. We thank you, we love you, and we praise your holy name. In Jesus' name we pray. Hallelujah. Amen. God bless you, everybody.